Good morning and welcome to the third week in September's Autism News. I am going to kick this week off with some good news that you may have already heard. Cody Lee of California won America's Got Talent. Cody is a singer who was born with optic nerve hypoplasia, which caused him to become blind. He is also autistic and he suffers from Addison's disease, which is a life-threatening disorder. But that has not stopped him from being an amazing musician, which led to his impressive win earlier this week. And rolling on with the good news, oftentimes elopement stories don't have happy endings, but this story of a 3-year-old boy who eloped in Florida does have a happy ending. A 3-year-old autistic boy was home with his grandmother last Sunday when he managed to unlock the deadbolt and walk out the door while she was in the bathroom. Once outside, he wandered into the woods of the Florida Panhandle. This is pretty much any parent or grandparent or caretaker's worst nightmare. But this story has a happy ending. The Santa Rosa County Sheriffs began searching the woods immediately, and they brought dogs. They released their bloodhounds, and less than 30 minutes later, the little boy was found. In fact, it only took 28 minutes for their bloodhounds to locate the little boy. He was surrounded by briars and mud, and deputies reportedly had to use machetes to get to him. He had scratches and some bug bites, but he was thankfully otherwise okay. So awesome job to that sheriff's department and to that bloodhound that found that little boy, and to the entire effort that brought him safely home to his family. Last week I talked about the Autism Cares Act, also known as the Autism Collaboration, Accountability, Research, Education, and Support Act of 2019. And I talked about how important the funding of this act is. It isn't a new act, it is something that needs to be funded again. Well, there is good news this week. This bipartisan, bicameral legislation received broad support. It had the support of 173 House members and 41 senators who signed on as co-sponsors, and it passed both the Senate and the House, and it will now be going on to the President's desk, where hopefully he will sign it in the coming days. Now I'm going to turn to one of the most fascinating stories that I read this week. I came across this story originally when a friend shared it from the York News Times, but I have now seen it popping up all over the place. And it is basically about the autistic children that have been born to a sperm donor. Certain mothers who had used donors began to realize that their children on the spectrum had actually come from the same father, and at this point they have identified about a dozen children from the same donor, which is a large amount of children to be on the spectrum to come from one parent. According to the article, this man's donations were available through multiple sources, at least 4 banks, from everything from high-end agencies to low fees or even free sites. Researchers have tested 7 of the half-siblings that are the biological children of this man, and all of them were found to have one of 2 genetic mutations that have been linked to autism, MBD1 and SHANK1. In other news, this seemed to be a week for disturbing handcuffing incidents with young children. First, I heard about a boy in Lancaster, California. The boy had a meltdown and he ended up eloping from his school, and school officials called the sheriff's deputies, who managed to track him down, handcuff him, and put him in the back of the police car. The father of the boy doesn't blame sheriff officials, but he was very upset with the school. A quote from him says, "What would have happened to my little boy if, before the police got there, in a meltdown state, he'd stepped in the wrong place or walked into the street and been hit by a car?" He says that the boy had an IEP in elementary school, but that they didn't do an IEP before the start of the new school year, which makes it sound like he doesn't have a current IEP right now, which he definitely sounds like he should have if he's had multiple meltdowns and has eloped 3 times since August and has an autism diagnosis. Meanwhile, in San Antonio, a 7-year-old with autism had a meltdown after a problem during a computer class and ended up handcuffed and sitting in the back of a police cruiser while he waited for his parents to arrive. And believe me, I know how difficult meltdowns can be. It's just, I cannot imagine a situation that Maggie could be in where any staff that has worked with her would respond in that way, by calling the police, by having her handcuffed. I know she's small, which is probably what people will say, but she is extremely strong. And she also elopes. I mean, she has eloped off school grounds, and her paras always got her and brought her back to the school. So just, I mean, there have been so many stories lately of kids that have gotten off school grounds that have been allowed to go, and they call the police and turned it over to the police. It's just, when you have elopers, usually there's something in there about, and maybe this isn't the case with all of these kids, but usually there's something in there about having a one-on-one person with that child. I don't know. It's just, it's really disturbing to me because I can really put myself in these parents' shoes, and it's horrifying to imagine getting that phone call, and I can't even imagine it. And I also can't, I mean, I've walked up to Maggie in the back of a police cruiser, and she was sitting there in a seatbelt with a huge smile on her face. That would have been totally different. She would have completely freaked out if he had had her handcuffed in the back of that. She would have been freaked out. I mean, it would have entirely changed the situation. Maybe it wasn't the best thing in the world that she thought she got a huge treat for eloping by riding in a police car, but I would much rather she think that it was a treat riding in a police car than that she'd be traumatized by being handcuffed in the back of it. And on a totally different note, I thought that this was kind of an interesting study. You know that I can't get through the week without at least talking about one study, and it's just because not all studies are good studies, but I tried to find the most interesting, the best, the worst, my favorites. This one was definitely among the most interesting that I've seen lately, at least to me, and I'm pretty sure that's because I'm the mother of girls who are autistic. This is coming out of Yale, and it says that nerve fiber tracts in the brains of autistic girls are more fragmented than those of typical girls. They looked at autistic boys' brains and neurotypical boys' brains, and their brains were indistinguishable. And then they looked at autistic girls' brains and neurotypical girls' brains, and the autistic girls' brains actually were different. The researchers said that they certainly thought they were going to see something in the girls, but they didn't expect this dramatic of a difference in the girls when they didn't find anything in the boys. And they also felt that this is particularly noteworthy because autistic girls tend to be underdiagnosed. And it's not very common for imaging studies to include meaningful samples of autistic girls. It took 5 years for them to assemble a large enough group because of the difficulty of enrolling girls in the study. They said compared with the controls, autistic girls and women had less integrity in several nerve tracts, the researchers found, including in one that connects the occipital lobe at the back of the head to the temporal lobe at the side. The differences are greater on the left side of the brain than the right. This may explain some of the girls' challenges with language because the brain's main language areas are in the left hemisphere. Anyways, that is the news for this week. If you like this video, we would love it if you'd give it a thumbs up, and if you're interested in all things autism, we'd love it if you'd hit subscribe. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.